Alright, YouTube. Hey, this is Jake from Idabros just coming at you with the part 2 of our One Piece video. I apologize. I had looked, and I know I was saying, hey, 20 minutes, 20 minutes. Well, that video did end up being about 20 minutes, but I did not get... I probably got maybe halfway through the story, if that. Along with some world building stuff at the beginning. So what we're going to do is we broke it up into two parts. We have part one, which is going to be the East Blue with some world building. East Blue up until the first part of Thriller Bark, and now we're going to try and get Thriller Bark through Wano, which is going to be the most current arc in the One Piece anime. And yeah, we're going to go from there. So if you haven't seen part one, I really would recommend going through, and I'll see if I get a link in the description, maybe an annotation. I don't know. However, YouTube does crazy stuff. But again, if this is something that you guys are interested in and expanding upon, because this, even though it is probably going to be around 40 minutes, is still a very brief look into the One Piece world. Very. So, we're talking about Thriller Bark. I believe the last thing I had touched on before it went black at the end was that we ran into Brook. Brook is, he's old, he's dead. He is a musician. Upon seeing him, Luffy immediately wanted him in the group. Then we find Thriller Bark. We talked about what Thriller Bark is. Thriller Bark is headed up by Gecko Moria, which is one of the 7 warlords. We essentially have kind of the main, of course, conflict between the Straw Hats and Gecko Moria's crew. Here we see something really cool that we don't unfortunately ever see again, but I really like it. On the left-hand side, we have Luffy's Nightmare mode. And for the life of me, I'm trying to think. I can't remember exactly how it came to be. I believe it was a combination of his and somebody else's power. I don't know. The key part of it, though, is it's super cool and it never happens again, and Luffy looks beast. So we have the big conflict here, and I personally think the most important part of Thriller Bark comes at the very, very end. After Luffy and the Straw Hats have came out victorious, they beat Moria and his zombified version of a gigantic continent-destroying beast called Oars. They go through and they run into another another one of the 7 warlords, Bartholomew Kuma. So Kuma has the power, I believe it's called Pawpaw Fruit. I could be wrong. He has a power where he has like essentially a paw pad on his hand, and he could touch whatever with it and essentially rejects it. And we see this at this part of the story, meaning that he either blasts it away or seemingly makes people disappear without a trace. He does this upon showing up to some of Moria's underlings, and he goes on an absolute tirade, just wrecking the remaining Straw Hats. And at this point in time, it's already after the main conflict in the arc, and Luffy is just beat to hell. Like, Luffy is done. And Kuma shows up, and both Zoro and Sanji come to essentially try and bargain with Kuma, because Kuma is saying that he needs somebody's head, that the world government wants Luffy's head, and that's why he's there. Zoro stands up, and Zoro's like, I may not be as important as Luffy. I may not be, may not have as big of a price on my head. But Zoro goes on to say, like, I will be the world's greatest swordsman. I may not be the king of the pirates like Luffy will be, but I still will be a problem toward the world government. I will be the greatest swordsman. Take me instead. um, Kuma reacts to this and saying, hey, you have all these dreams, and you're just going to give them up, you know, right now. You're just going to give them up and die. And Zoro says, yes, that's how much Luffy is worth to me, or that's how much I believe in Luffy. So I think that, and actually, let me explain the rest of it. So from there, what Kuma does is Kuma uses his devil fruit power to essentially extract all the damage that Luffy has taken from this whole arc, which essentially has caused him to be laid out, passed out, done. Right? He uses that to like extract all of that anguish and pain and damage out of Luffy, and essentially is like, okay, like here's your chance. This is, all of Luffy's pain. I'm gonna put this onto you, and like most likely you'll die, because at this point, like Zoro was already like wrecked too, like from the whole arc's fight, and I believe he even tried to fight Kuma a little bit. Like he was wrecked. So Kuma's like, dude, you're probably gonna die, but like here you go. And he puts it onto Zoro, and like everybody's passed out for the most part, besides I think Brook and Sanji, and essentially like Zoro's just left standing there, total bamf, like just arms crossed, and is just like shredded. And that to me was like the best part of this whole story. Zoro is probably my favorite character, and that was like, I think, his coolest moment. So that was Thriller Bark. From there, we go into uh, it was called a summit arc, I think, on my little thing at the beginning of part one. But it's broken up into a couple different pieces. The first piece is after Thriller Bark, the Straw Hats set their sights on the New World, which is the second part of the Grand Line. And in order to get to the New World, they have to go through the backside of the Red Line, right? Because that's a continuous land strip that goes all the way down and all the way up, continuous land strip that breaks apart the seas. Now, in order to get from one side to the other, they have to go underneath and around, essentially. Like there's a specific hole, like they have to get there and about. And to do that, they have to have like a special coating done on their ship that makes it so they have essentially the ability to submerge. Now, to get to that part, they have to go through a place that's called the Sabaody Archipelago, and I can't say it very well. And in the I can't say it, Sabaody Archipelago, they get into some mischief. So where this is in terms of the geography of the world is going to be right at the essentially base of where the world government and part of the world government is going to be the founding members of the world government and their family. They're called celestial dragons, and they're not as cool as the title makes them sound. They're essentially, these families and these rulers, the people that founded the world government, and they live on top of this part of the Red Line, and they're essentially looked to as gods. And they are terrible people. They have slaves. They are overwhelmingly rich. They essentially are like the worst of the worst. Under the guise, though, of they are they run it, right? Like they are the rulers, for I guess more or less a different way of saying it. Either way, so Luffy and the gang, they're in this place looking for the person that could coat their ship. They're surrounded by these celestial dragons, and the story unfolds to where Luffy essentially just ends up punching one of them. They're in an auction house things go awry. Um, Luffy makes a friend. The friend is a mermaid that ends up getting almost sold. Luffy clocks one of them, and in that, because they are so important, if anything happens to one of them, um, then one of the three admirals are automatically dispatched. And the three admirals are the Navy's most powerful forces. So Luffy clocks one, and like all hell breaks loose. We also are introduced to a group of different pirate groups. I know that kind of sounds weird, but they are the other rookie. Wow, I can't talk. I'm sorry. A group of pirates that they're several different groups. I guess I should say. They all started at the same around the same time as Luffy, and they are um, essentially they're called the worst generation. Um, Not all of the pirates in these different groups are part of this. They dub the worst generation as the most powerful. The pirates in this generation that get to this point in the Grand Line that have a bounty over a certain amount. So in this group, we have the characters that we see here. We have Luffy, of course. We have Kid, which is another pirate, and then we have Law. Um, all three of these characters, well, we might not see them for a while. Besides Luffy, of course, they will have very very important roles in the story, and they're all of the same power level as Luffy, which we've seen do amazing things. Also, Zoro is in this group as well in terms of the worst generation and having that size of bounty. Um, so we get here and things go crazy. One of the admirals come, and at this point in the story, Luffy is back with the rest of the Straw Hats, and they get decimated by Kiziru. Kiziru. He is one of the admirals, and he has a light Logia fruit, which is one of the devil fruits, where his body is essentially light, and he wrecks him. And the Straw Hats even have on their side the person that was going to coat their ship, um, being Silver's Rayleigh, which Rayleigh was actually they go to find out the right hand of Goldie Rogers, the Pirate King. So he's super powerful, and he comes to their aid, and he holds off the admiral. And then Kuma shows up, and not only Kuma, but we find out that the world government essentially has used Kuma's body and created robots that could shoot lasers and are super powerful by themselves, called pacifistas, and they are just laying waste to the Straw Hats and all the other pirates that are on the island, because they were all there when Luffy went through and not all the pirates, but essentially the members of the worst generation. They were all there when Luffy went through and clocked the Celestial Dragon. So Kuma, the actual Kuma, comes and shows up and starts just tapping people with his devil fruit power. And here, including Luffy, like Luffy is watching all of them. He's assuming that essentially all of his teammates, all of his friends, are dying right before his eyes, because all we see as a viewer and all Luffy sees is Kuma touching them and them disappearing. Um, from there, we actually find out that no, this isn't what's happening. They aren't just dying; they are essentially being relocated. So we go to find out that all the Straw Hat members have been relocated to places throughout the world, not directly close to them, and essentially they all go through and start their training arc. Um, from here, what we find out, and it's spoiler alerts, I guess, we've already kind of went through that, is during the Water 7 arc, Marshall D. Teach went through and unfortunately beat Portcullis D. Ace, which is Luffy's sworn brother. They're not related by blood, but they grew up together. They are, for all intents and purposes, brothers. Teach went through and beat Ace and turned him into the world government. Now, when Luffy is relocated, he is not far off of where he is already. He actually shows up at Boa Hancock's, which is another one of the seven warlords, Amazon Island, essentially. It's an island of only women. It's called Amazon Lily. So Luffy shows up there, more shenanigans. Boa, or Hancock, ends up falling in love with Luffy, and Luffy is dumb and has absolutely no idea. Um, and that's kind of what Luffy's character is throughout the whole series. At no point is he some sort of genius. He is a fighting genius, you could say, but he's not a smart guy, which is part of the kind of endearing of his character. Anyways, so that all happens. Luffy goes to find out that Ace has been taken by the world government and has an execution date set. So this comes to the climax of the Summit arc. This is the Paramount War. And what happens is Luffy goes through, he tries to rescue Ace at the prison he's being held out called Impel Down. He has the first, at least to the world that's known, I guess at this point, one of the first break-ins and break-outs of the prison. Unfortunately, Ace isn't there. He just misses Ace. He does get Jinbei, or Jinbei, depending on subbed and dub and whatnot. But he is another one of the seven warlords. But he essentially disowned his title in trying to save Ace because he had a debt to Ace and the Whitebeard Pirates, which Ace is one of the division commanders of. And he goes through and, Luffy breaks in, Ace is gone, brings Jinbei out. Essentially, there's a huge prison break. And from there, we get into, like I said, the climax. So Luffy gets to um, Marineford. And Marineford is essentially the Navy HQ of the One Piece world. And all the admirals are there. This is where the execution is being held. And not only does Luffy show up, but right before Luffy shows up, we have a conflict where, because Ace is a member, not only a member, but one of the commanders of the Whitebeard Pirates, Whitebeard himself and his whole crew, his whole alliance, like everybody that's like in with Whitebeard, which is at this point one of, and I believe the oldest of the four emperors, the Yonko, shows up. They're duking it out. Like he has a gigantic team, and they're going against the Marines, and like it's crazy. Um, but Luffy gets there, and essentially, they're kind of on the downs. Luffy's entrance, he's not very, very well known even at this point, even if he is one of the worst generation and whatnot. Hasn't made a name for himself yet. But Whitebeard does know after Luffy tells him, I guess, not knows out of sight, but out of conversation, that Luffy is Ace's brother and Luffy is important to him, vice versa. So this all happens, and we go through, and Luffy tries to rescue Ace, and again, all sorts of shenanigans happen. Luffy ultimately does rescue Ace off the execution platform, but in coming back and trying to escape, Ace is ultimately beat. And as you can see, with a gigantic flaming hole through his chest by one of the three admirals, Akainu, which has essentially volcano or magma powers. Again, I'm terrible at remembering the specific fruit names, but that's what we see that ultimately his power is. Like he has magma power, which unfortunately beats out Ace's Miro Miro, I believe it is, Nomi, which is the flame fruit. It's unfortunately like hierarchy wise, it's ahead of or more powerful, you could say, than what Ace's fruit is. And Ace, he sacrifices himself for Luffy and dies right in front of Luffy's eyes. Um, so not only is this terrible, but it's bad. It's bad. In this story as well, kind of in the same time frame, one of the big reasons that we find out that the world government is like hyping up Ace's execution so much is it's also revealed that Ace is the son of Goldie Roger. So Ace is the son of the Pirate King, we find out. And this is something that Luffy already knew. Um, and like it's not a surprise to him, but it's a surprise to everybody else in the world. We go to find out that like Ace was in the womb for like an ungodly amount of time through his mother's like will, and because the Marines were like finding and executing babies and stuff like that fit the time frame to make sure that there was nobody to directly carry on Roger's will, um, because they were afraid of it. Like that was their enemy. Um, we also find out that Luffy is the son, and we found out, I believe, a little bit before this as viewers, but the world found out that Luffy, this up and coming new pirate, not only was he the brother of Ace, in a non bloodline way, but bloodline wise, his father is Monkey D. Dragon, which is in the One Piece world the most. I can't remember the title. I want to say it's like the most infamous man alive, or something like that. Like he is the most wanted man in the world because he is the head of the Revolutionary Army, which is in direct confrontation with the world government. So everybody finds that out as well, and then like the hype, Luffy's hype just goes up. At the very end of this arc, though, after Ace's death, after everything, what we do is Luffy decides to train with Rayleigh, which, like I mentioned before, was Roger's right hand man. He's like the he's an old powerful like, but he knows like all the ways. Like even in his old age, he is like one of, I feel like I've thrown around most powerful characters a lot, but like he's super cool. Um, and Luffy decides to go through and trains with him for 2 years, and he goes through and communicates this all in a essentially like a tribute to Ace, where he goes back to Marineford after the battle, and he has a tattoo on his arm, or well, it's not a real tattoo, but it looks similar to Ace's, but instead of signifying, Ace has one with his name, kinda, except it has an S crossed out and then it has a C below it because like they misspelled his name or something. Here they had originally planned to meet back at the archipelago in a certain amount of time. He has that time crossed out, and below that has 2 years. So they're, the newspapers get a hold of it. Everybody's able to see all the Straw Hats, in their different locations that Kuma transported them to. They all find out that, hey, Luffy wants us to wait and meet back up at the ship in 2 years. Um, and then moving forward, we have a 2 year time skip. The 2 year skip comes, and we see, Luffy's done a whole bunch of training. Everybody has their kind of little perspective training arcs, and it doesn't, not all of them have um, a really defined training arc, some more than others. But they all meet back at the archipelago, and they're like, cool, like, hey, we're together. Rayleigh has coded their ship in between the time that he was and wasn't training Luffy. We also find out that Kuma, his last directive, before he was, and I kind of touched on this earlier, but they were basing the robots after him. He also essentially just became like an android, or not an android, like a cyborg. Um, his mind had been completely shut off. The last thing that he was able to do was protect the Straw Hat ship, the Sunny. Um, he protected it the whole time that they were gone, and as soon as they showed up, like, he bounced. Like, that was his final thing that he was able to do, and we find out the reason why is at one point Kuma was one of the revolution, like the high-ranking members of the Revolutionary Army that Luffy's father leads. So this all happens, which is pretty cool. And we go from there. Actually, I'm going to back up down to Fishman Island, which was their original goal once they got their ship coated. Um, from there, some stuff happens. Like, it's that whole arc. We meet more fishmen, more mermaids. We're introduced to the royal family with the fishmen, which they will be important moving forward. I think the biggest story thing to happen in that Fishman Island arc is at the very end of it, after they go through and beat the main antagonist of the arc itself, which is like there's more civil um, battles, I guess you could say, like in Fishman Island, different forces and whatnot. But the biggest thing that happens is Luffy finds out that Fishman Island is under the control or the protection of Big Mom, which is another one of the Yonko. And it used to be under Whitebeard. Whitebeard died in Marineford, so now they're under Big Mom's protection because they have to. Luffy at this point has become attached to Fishman Island, and he essentially has there's a point in the story where she is on the phone. He takes the phone and is like, "I'm gonna kick your ass. Like, I like this place. This place will be mine. I will find you in the new world, which is where they're going, the second part of the Grand Line, and I will beat you." And that's it. So he immediately makes an enemy. From there, they finally get into the new world. We see the first island that they get to after this 2 year time skip, after Fishman Island, is Punk Hazard. And Punk Hazard is, as an arc itself, it just moves into the next one. And some would say that everything from here, which is Punk Hazard, all the way to current, is all lead up into Wano. The reason why is they randomly happen upon this island because they hear a distress call. Um, it's engulfed in flames all around it, and when you look at it from like a sky view, it's half ice, half fire. We go to find out the two reasons why. For one, it was completely deserted because there was some experiments that happened there, and like everything died. And then we also find out that two of the admirals had gone to that island in order to fight to see who would become the new I can't think of the word right now, but essentially like the new commander of the Navy. And it's going to be the Akainu, and I also can't remember the Akainu and the admiral that has the ice powers. I am totally blanking. I apologize on the name right now. But they like pretty much went through and wrecked the island. We find out there's more experiments being had there. We get introduced into kind of the more underground part of One Piece. The criminal organizations. We have Law, which was one of the members of the Worst Generation that had previously actually helped Luffy after the battle, after the Paramount War, the Battle of Marineford. Law is also a doctor, and because Chopper wasn't there, because everybody got split up, Law went through and did operate on Luffy and saved his life. Identified as Kuzan. Kuzan is the ice one. Akainu is the fire one. They battled on the island. Anyways, Law's there. More things happen, and essentially the big part of this arc that is important moving forward in the story is Luffy and Law make an alliance, and their goal is to defeat one of the Yonko. And they set out, they say that they're going to beat Kaido, which Kaido was the big guy that we saw that's a Yonko. He is dubbed the world's strongest creature. He is the head of the Beast Pirates, and how they are going through and how Law is saying that they're going to do this is by going to Dressrosa, which is the next arc that we'll jump right into, and going through and essentially blowing up a factory. And what the factory is Doflamingo, the guy that's here with the tongue sticking out and the super awesome purple boa. Doflamingo is another one of the seven warlords, and he is making artificial devil fruits. And these artificial devil fruits are of the zone variety. So they go through and they make people animals. And Kaido, being the Beast Pirates, he prefers only those zone, you know, power users on his crew. Not only, but like that's what he prefers. So Law is saying, hey, like let's go through and blow up the factory and this and that in Dressrosa, and that will ultimately cripple Kaido's forces, and like let's go through and beat him at that point. Um, Law also has kind of an ulterior motive here because in destroying that artificial devil fruit factory, he is hoping that Kaido will go through and kill Doflamingo for him. Um, we find out that Law had a tie in the past with Dofi, which is Doflamingo. He was previously on his crew. Stuff happened. Um, that's kind of really going into a lot more details than I want to, but we know that essentially Law wants to see Dofi dead. Like that is his goal. In this arc, we're also introduced to the Dressrosa um, royal family. We find um, the new that because Kuzan had been beaten by a Kainu, he left the Navy, and we see that there are new admirals, and we meet one of the new admirals in this arc, and he's pretty awesome. He also is a devil fruit user. His power is gravity. He can essentially manipulate gravity and go through and like bring out like comets and stuff, which like I'm not sure how that goes with. I don't know, but it is pretty cool. Um, we have like the major battle. That's his name. Fujitora is the new admiral that we meet. We also find that Luffy's second brother, which they thought that his brother, his second brother, had died when they were all young. His name is Sabo. Go to find out that Sabo was actually rescued by Luffy's father um, in his going around. But Sabo actually suffered memory loss the whole time up until he read that Ace died, and that triggered his memories to come back. So we have crazy stuff. Luffy battles Doflamingo. They both it's a pretty crazy fight. Um, Doflamingo tries to use he has the string fruit. He uses his strings to create essentially he calls it a bird cage around the whole island of Dressrosa, and it's like razor sharp strings, and brings it in to go through and try and kill everybody. Ultimately, Luffy and Law beat him before that. We also have really cool showings from Zoro beating some of Dofi's high-ranking officers, his family members. Super cool arc. It's really long though. From there, we go through at the end of Dressrosa. We find that Luffy, the Straw Hats have essentially split into two teams, and one team stayed on Dressrosa. The other went to the island, quote unquote, island of Zoe. And way back on Punk Hazard, we found that the Straw Hats picked up a two people, um, Kinemon and a child, and the child actually is super important. Um, and I am just blanking on One Piece names. Either way, they pick up these two people and they think that it's just a father and son from a nation that's called Wano, and we have that's kind of like they're like, okay, let's go to Wano, but we have to find all the different members of the group. Pause. Hello? You already interrupted. What? Yes, open. Yes, what?
Can I please ask if I can play with Emma at her house?
Not right now. Also, you have something right here.
What?
Go.
Something right.
Go.
Got it.
Pause. Yeah. So, anyways, essentially, we're introduced into some characters that have ties to Wano, and one of them go off with the rest of the Straw Hats. Tuzo, the other Straw Hats, stayed in Dressrosa, fought Dofi, and now Dofi's defeated. Their next goal is to go to Zoe. That's also where the rest of Law's group is, as well as in Zoe, and get everybody, get the fighting forces together, and ultimately go to Wano. And again, we have characters that are from Wano that we've picked up, and they're going through. And another thing of note is that's where Kaido is. Kaido is more or less ruling. From my understanding, there's other ruling parties, but Kaido is in Wano. So even though they already beat Dofi, and that was kind of Law's goal to begin with, anyways, Law essentially keeps his word, and they're all planning to go ultimately to Wano to beat Kaido. So they go to Wano, and they found out that Wano, or not Wano, excuse me, Zoe is not an island or a phantom island, even that it's talked about in the story. The reason why Zoe is a phantom island is because um, it is on the back of a huge elephant. So the elephant is named Zunishi, and Zunishi, and it goes through and it kind of tells why, and I might be butchering it a little bit, but he was essentially sentenced to walk around the earth for something that he had done in the past, and only certain people can hear him. Um, so Luffy can hear him. We found out that Roger could also hear him, and also Oh, I apologize. So I was just double checking. So Luffy could hear him. We found out that Roger could hear him, and also Momonosuke. Momonosuke was the child that I was telling you about just a couple seconds ago. He was one of the ones that they found in Punk Hazard. So Momonosuke and Kinemon, right? So they found both of those guys. They're from Wano. One's a kid. They assumed the other was the father. Found them in Punk Hazard. They found one of the other um, members of their group in Dressrosa. They head to Zoe. Momonosuke can also hear Zanushi, the big elephant. They could all hear him. We also find out that one of the Beast pirates, one of his head dudes, right, showed up. His name is Jack. Showed up before the Straw Hats did, and apparently just wrecked the place, looking for another one of Kinemon's and Momonosuke's peeps, right? He's a ninja. So they were looking for him, whatever. They said, hey, he's not here. They go through and proceed to wreck the place. But the rest of the Straw Hats patch everybody up, and there we kind of go into the next arc, which is, well, actually, backtrack. So now the group of the Straw Hats that was in Dressrosa, they finally make it to Zoe. When they get to Zoe, they find out that Sanji has been taken because Sanji essentially was promised to marry one of Big Mom's daughters. We find out that Sanji belongs to a family called the Vinsmokes, which is a prominent kind of like ruling force in one of the oceans, the North Blue, and they are like military might. They at one point completely conquered all of the North Blue, and they're looking to essentially reclaim their glory. And part of that was this arranged marriage where, for the Vinsmokes, they were thinking that they were going to get Big Mom's backing. So Sanji is taken right before Luffy and everybody shows up. From there, they all decide that essentially they're going to split their forces yet again, and Luffy and a group, including Brook and Nami and Chopper and a few of the Minks, which are the people that are like animal people that live on Zou, go to rescue Sanji in a place called Whole Cake Island, which is actually the name of the next arc, and the rest go straight to Wano and then some other places. From there, we have the next arc, which is Whole Cake Island. That's where the whole part of it is Luffy's going through and trying to get Sanji back. First, Sanji doesn't want to go because his family, quote unquote, the Vinsmokes, have said that they'll go through and essentially kill everybody that Sanji loves if he doesn't go through with this wedding. A lot of stuff happens, and essentially we find out that Sanji's bride is actually pretty evil and kind of crazy, and we have all the different members of Big Mom's family, which her pirate group, the Big Mom Pirates, are essentially made of all of her children. She goes through and bursts like a crazy amount of kids, and most of them are super powerful, and there's a lot of fights that happen within this specific arc, and it kind of all culminates with the wedding itself, and Luffy works with Beiji, which is another member of the Worst Generation that at this point we thought was subservient, was part of Big Mom's crew, but in actuality he was there the whole time to try and kill her. So they make kind of this pact to try and fight against Big Mom, and it doesn't really go according to plan. They don't kill her, but at this point, Luffy's thing is like, more so Nami is kind of talking Luffy into, hey, we came here to save Sanji. We didn't come here to fight. Like, we have Sanji. Let's bounce. So there's, again, more fights ensue. The Vinsmokes are a pretty cool addition to the universe. Also, we're introduced to Katakuri, which is Big Mom's strongest son. And he is pretty amazing. He actually, and I haven't really touched on it, a form of power that in this universe they call hockey. And I'm probably mispronouncing it, but there's 3 different types of it. One is armament, which we could see Luffy has in this picture on the right-hand side. It essentially is like they call it like an invisible force field or invisible armor that you could put on your body, and it hardens it and makes all your hits super strong. You could cover weapons in it. It essentially strengthens everything, right? And then there's also observation. There's a third kind that's not really super relevant because it's so unique, but the second kind is called observation, and that's where you could, just like it sounds, it's a stronger type of like fighting observation. You could notice things. Katakuri's type of observation is he could actually see slightly into the future, which makes it so he's super powerful, and it ends up being, some people classify as the best, if not one of the best fights in all of One Piece, towards the end of the Whole Cake Island arc, which is Katakuri versus Luffy. So I definitely recommend, even if you don't watch the full series, take a look at that fight because it is pretty nuts. It's pretty awesome. Yeah, and from there, they finally escape. Sanji kind of makes amends to his family kind of makes amends to him because they were dicks the whole time. But they, finally see that Sanji isn't a weakling, that he is powerful. and he saves them multiple times, and they make sure to try and return the favor. Um, yeah, and ultimately, Luffy and them, they escape. They escape with Sanji, and then they head to, oh, this is a terrible photo. They head to the final place. Now, this is current in the anime, is the island of Wano. So Wano is, like I said, it's Kinemon's and Momonosuke's homeland. They've been traveling with the Straw Hats all the way back since Punk Hazard for the goal of coming back and overthrowing Kaido and his regime out of the country. We find out that Kaido had killed Momonosuke's real father. Now, Momonosuke, we thought was Kinemon's child. He is not. In Zou, we find out that Momonosuke's father was actually the ruler of Wano, that had been murdered or had been killed by Kaido. And that's why they're ultimately going through and going back to Wano, is everybody's interests have kind of aligned at this point, right? We have Kinemon's, Luffy's, Law's, the assorted people from Zou, because the Zou, they're called Minks. They were loyal to Momonosuke's father. Everybody's interests have kind of aligned, and Wano is really set to be probably one of the largest and most important arcs in One Piece to date. Um, and that's current. So that's up to right now in the anime. That's where we're at. This part is probably even longer than the first part, and I apologize. But I really appreciate anybody that decided to stick around throughout the whole video, throughout my ramblings of the different arcs. I know I missed a ton, and I was super long winded, but I know a ton has been left out. If anybody wants individual videos through each individual arc that are shorter and easier to consume, let me know. I would be more than happy to go through and do this again. I also have been thinking about doing this with different anime series, maybe ones that don't cover 20 years, that I could do a lot quicker. But I thought One Piece would be a good one to start with. So again, this is Jake from the Idabros. I really appreciate everybody watching. If anybody, comment, rate, subscribe, make sure you hit that bell so you can be notified for any videos that we put up in the future. Any suggestions for content is definitely welcome. Again, thank you, and peace out.